the elite of the world teach their children something different than is taught to your standard family through the public school system. There's 7 or 8 different tenets that are taught to the elite children that are not taught to everybody else. And just knowing what those 7 or 8 things are sets those children on an entirely different path than, your average public school student.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Infinite Wisdom Experience. And today we've got a very special guest. Today's guest is a true bridge between ancient wisdom and modern creativity. And Dr. Scott Koeneman is an entrepreneur. He's a quantum healing hypnosis technique practitioner and a passionate revealer of Gnostic wisdom. There's my big interest in him. And so he's also the founder of Mystic Matrix Designs. And these are really, really cool, where he's bringing esoteric symbols back into the everyday life through powerful, intentional clothing. What a novel idea. So he's also a skilled content creator. He helps with spiritual entrepreneurs and conscious brands that amplify their message with scroll-stopping videos and storytelling. This man just does it all. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate being here.
So we've had conversations before, and those conversations were so intriguing that we just wanted to get you on the show and share your knowledge and your gifts with our audience. So, give us a little bio. Tell us about yourself.
So I started out as a standard corporate guy, right? I was a desk jockey working in a cube. That was, in the mid 20 teens, up until that point. And like a lot of people, hopefully a lot of people, I stumbled across a book that changed my belief system, my outcome, or at least it started steering me onto the path. And that book was called The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. And it's I don't really have it on my recommended list because it's a 600-page book. It's written in a near academic style that would exhaust, I think, most people. But I couldn't put it down. And where that led me, Ross, was it led me to the realization that the elite of the world teach their children something different than is taught to your standard family through the public school system. There's 7 or 8 different tenets that are taught to the elite children that are not taught to everybody else. And just knowing what those 7 or 8 things are sets those children on an entirely different path than, your average public school student. One of those tenets is that matter came before mind. In other words, I'm sorry, mind came before matter is what they're taught, whereas your public school student is taught that matter came before mind. So that's just a basic tenet, just a basic thing that for me, I know to your audience, they're probably like, well, yeah, duh. But, for mid 20 teens me, I was like, wait, hold it. That was just that very first light. Yeah. And the rest of the revelations in there, such as the reincarnation is real. It's taught. Is something that they prepare for. Then again, I was like, wait, there was the second bombshell. Okay, all right. So now I'm even if mid 20 teens me didn't believe those things, it was enough to know that they did, right? And that they controlled the world, and this is their belief system. And so that stunned me. And where that led was discovering more and more about hypnosis and Dolores Cannon, past life regression hypnosis. That is what ultimately put me on the path to today. And how I find myself talking to you two fine gentlemen.
So explain,
So,
there's a lot of, excuse me, Gary, there's a lot of people who don't know who Dolores Cannon is. Let's give them a brief history of her and then go from there.
Sure. Dolores Cannon was she passed in 2014, but she had a 50 plus year career in past life regression hypnotherapy. Uh, she had a wonderful story that you can read about in her book. She has about 45 different books. Some of your readers might be familiar with the Convoluted Universe series. She wrote that. Uh, so she had a long storied career where she perfected this technique to allow people to relive and experience their past lives. And again, for 20 teens, Dr. Scott here, uh, who had just figured out months earlier that elites teach their kids about reincarnation, that was a revelation
hmm.
to me. And I was curious and decided to jump in. So I was standard corporate jockey guy, and now I'm learning past life regression hypnosis. I became a student at the QHHT Academy, and I
Hmm.
learned the technique and I started applying it.
Hmm.
So,
So, and so now you're doing what you label as matrix hypnosis. What are the core principles or unique aspects that differentiate matrix hypnosis from, let's say, other forms of hypnotherapy or even QHHT?
so the difference, I think, according to my understanding, the difference is in how the method is applied.
Okay.
So, in quantum healing hypnosis technique, that's the name of the technique.
Yeah.
The client goes under regression and they become that past life persona for much of the session. Okay. So their language will change. They won't talk about things in the second or third person. They'll say I, right? Which would make sense if I had you under hypnosis and
They've,
you
they've
recall
taken
the
first
pat.
person position for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so that puts me in a different spot as their practitioner. So now I envision this as I'm sort of like the operator in that movie, The Matrix. I'm the guy that's on the outside. I'm the guy that's still here in 2025. I'm sitting in the chair. I've got my client mic'd up or wired into the Matrix, right? They're in the simulation. They're seeing this past life. They're living it just as Neo walked through the Matrix. And so
Mm.
it's my job to guide and encourage and provide a sense of security to the client as they're going through that matrix, that past life
So you're
simulation.
you're
So
like the
that's why
Morpheus.
So just for
You're like the
clarity,
Morpheus.
yeah, just for clarity though, so you're the guy that's reading the code on the screen. You're seeing the code, right?
yes,
And you're laying out this and this and this and this and this, while the person that your client is actually the person that's in the matrix,
correct.
right? Okay,
Yes,
cool.
sir.
Very nice.
Uh, you know,
Not that
and
like
from
I've
the
ever seen the Matrix. That's like, we've never watched the Matrix or ever referred to the Matrix before.
I figured it resonate with your audience. Yes. From the operator's perspective, they can see patterns in the code, right? Patterns that the person reliving the life might not see right there in the moment.
Hmm.
Um, you know, for there's so many examples. Let me just give one.
Got it.
I I had a client who in her past life was almost a very victimized person. A lot of negative stuff happened to her, abuse and otherwise. So it's kind of the worst things that you could think of, right? However, leading up to those things, she sort of put herself in those positions intentionally, knowingly or unknowingly. And so when she was under hypnosis, she not only went to one past life, she went to, seven or eight in this one session, right? And the subconscious kept bringing through the same idea that,
Hmm.
in past lives 1 through 8, she was a victim. And then we finish that life and go to the next one. Well, here she was a victim again, and a victim again, and a victim again. And in the operator's chair, I'm able to see this and I'm seeing a pattern. I'm seeing this play out 8 times. And so that enables me, when we conclude the past life portion of the technique, that enables me to call in the oversoul, the higher self, and ask it questions. Why did you show her this pattern? Why did you make this so obvious? Now, I know because I've done this, but the sessions are recorded. And so when I ask their oversoul that question, they get to hear themselves answer it in their own words. And the answer is always something like, you know, uh, we love her, but she needed to recognize this abusive pattern. And just knowing about this pattern will allow her a chance to break it,
Hmm.
to break the pattern.
Mhm.
And that's why she had so many similar lives, because these were chances to break the pattern, but she never did. And we hope that this time the pattern will break, right?
Mhm.
So that's just one example
So
of,
I'm curious. I'm curious here. So most people, like the pre-20 teens you,
yeah.
um, don't walk around and going, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna go check out my past life stuff today. Let me go call Dr. Scott." Like how, how are they? Like what are
I
they?
do.
Most people don't, right? Like what kind of things are they coming to you for? And um, when they come to you, do they know that past life is a part of that journey or that experience?
Some of them do. Some of
Okay.
them are very attuned spiritually, and they understand, at least conceptually, about reincarnation, and they'll have
Yeah.
questions. Yes, some of them do. Others of them, it's a complete surprise. Either case is fine. That knowledge is not required. And a client doesn't even really have to go to a past life. I've had clients go to other dimensions, other planets. Some of them are very sci-fi type of things that took place in the ancient
Hmm.
past, Atlantis and otherwise,
Hmm.
right? But all of them have a message and a lesson for the client. And so, we used to say, you'll go to a past life. About 2002 or 2003, for some reason, Dolores noted in her books that changed. Not all
Hmm.
clients were going to a past existence anymore, at least not the past as we know it.
Not the
Um,
linear past that we know. Yeah.
yes,
Right.
Hmm.
you would get these other convoluted type of existences where, maybe you're an ET, or maybe you live on a different plane of existence entirely, right? It's whatever your oversoul wants you to see at that moment. That's what
Mhm.
makes the technique beautiful, because I'm not telling them which life to go to. The client has no control over which life they're going to. That is all up to the S. We call it the SC, which is the higher self or the oversoul, the superconscious. It's up
Right.
to that portion of
Mhm.
their mind where they're going.
Mhm. Did Dolores did she channel this information? That's my
She was not a
impression.
channeler.
She was
She
not a
she
channeler.
she called herself a reporter. She was an old she has this old Midwestern grandma persona. If you see her
Yes,
on
she did.
social media,
Right.
and actually she's from St. Louis, which is where I'm from. So there's a little bit of kinship there. And she she just had this reporter way about her. She perfected the art of questioning. So if you're under hypnosis, my job is to ask you questions that don't necessarily lead you in a direction, but that encourages you to open up. And so she perfected this beautiful art of questioning.
Hmm.
That's synchronicist of that. We just completed a live stream just yesterday on questioning. So
Oh,
and
wow.
we've been, absolute fascinated. I mean, Gary has worked on Gary, what do you call it?
Question concept.
the question concept for decades, being a master hypnotist himself. It's so important actually in any day, everyday life, whether it be business, your personal, it doesn't matter. Understanding the real ability to ask questions can absolutely open up a whole new world for you.
And even more so than asking, knowing what you're doing when you ask questions or certain
Yeah.
types of questions is where the power is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Totally agree. That
Yeah.
is that is a synchronicity, and hats off to you for your long career in hypnosis. I hope to have a
Thanks.
long career there myself.
Yeah. Yes, I've done
Guys,
my
you guys have
time.
both got the hair for it, that's for sure. So
So we talk about to our audience what we call the infinity matrix, and so the infinity matrix is in essence um, the experience of knowing that there is a, everything out there in the infiniteness of that, and then the infiniteness of what's inside here, and then you exist at the center point of it all, right?
That's a
So
great way
you're
to
the
explain it.
well, so the combination of what you're putting your awareness on out there, consciously and unconsciously, and what's going on in here, consciously and unconsciously, and they come together in this moment called you, right? And that's how you exist, and that's where so so it's not just the subconscious mind. You guys call it superconscious, and it's the total conscious experience of the being that we call the spiritually evolving life force, which is our acronym for self, right? Spiritually evolving life force. And
Love that.
and from that place, we want people to get to what we call the choice convergence point, and the choice convergence point is the epicenter of all of that, where all infinite choices and all realms and possibilities exist that you can pick and choose from, right? So it sounds to me, when you're bringing these people into the trance state, and then getting them to get to this, other than, so if they come in with a problem, for example, right, the way I explain this, they come in with a problem, and the problem's in this box, right, and this box is called anxiety or stress or whatever, right, not losing weight or whatever, you name it, that's the box they live in. And so all of the resources for that box for that problem to exist are contained within that box. So what we need to do is get them out of that box into a realm of other than problem, right? And that's where the past life and the alternate universes, all those kinds of things exist, where there's other things. So now they're in a place of, holy cows, there's more choices than that box that I was living in. Now it opens up or cracks that and allows for new things to come in and expand the experience of the box.
Wow. That's a wonderful way of saying that. Because inside the box, you only have a limited tool set. Outside, you have an infinite tool set. So why stay in a
Absolutely.
little box?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I used to say to clients all the time is, when they come in, they tell me about the problem. And I'd say, well, the cool thing about the solution is it's everywhere the problem is not. So I don't want to talk about the problem anymore. Let's talk about everything else.
That's amazing. I love that acronym self too.
Yeah. Thanks.
Right.
So yeah, so with the work you're doing, you're working with the matrix of the mind, right? So um what have you witnessed with a client, or even the client has reported back to you after a matrix hypnosis session, where you go, whoa, there's something way bigger going on here? Because I remember you were telling us in our previous conversation outside of our interviews here, where someone would tell you some stuff about past life, and that there was documentation or evidence that that actually happened.
Yes. Um, this would have been my third session during my internship, my second or third session, right? And I know you had a long career, but do you remember your second or third session?
No,
You know,
it was a long
you're
time ago.
you're at that point. I can tell you, my label was intern, right?
Yeah.
Interns aren't experts by any means, But
Yeah.
during my like third internship session, um, I had a client who went under hypnosis very, very easily. Everything was moving along in a textbook-like fashion, right? He recalled a life during the American Civil War, and he started giving details. Well, I'm a researcher, I love looking up facts. That's why there's a doctor in front of my name because I like looking up papers and reading about things. But he was giving specific details about this war general, things that I was just noting in the margin of my page as he was talking, right? So he would give a battle, a date, a territory he was in, what his Union Army squad was doing, right? And why they were doing it. He even gave details like his wife's name in that life. So I'm like, okay, okay, okay. The 1800s was not before the written record. That's one of the advantages of if someone doesn't go too far back, we have something we can maybe research and look up. Well, for intern me at the time, who was constantly trying to prove to himself and others that this other world, this reincarnation concept exists, I thought, wow, I've got things I can look up now. But then to compound the issue, when he came out of hypnosis, he was doing this with his hand, which is like the
Yeah,
universal
that's it.
sign for give me something to write
It's
on.
already. Uh-huh.
So I gave him my notebook and he sketched a picture. I actually have it. I don't think it'll show too well on camera, but he sketched a picture for me. I should just maybe I can even get it for you. Maybe it'll show. He sketched a picture, and when I went to look up this particular war general, the similarity to this sketch was great. I don't know if you can see this
Oh,
little
there we
war
go.
Yeah.
general guy here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kind of sitting
Oh,
at a
that's pretty good. Yeah.
table. He's got a sword. He's got sideburns, little
Hmm.
mustache, hat, right? I found nearly that exact same picture, minus the table, on with the other matching details when I researched it. So this general was a guy named General David Hunter. He's not a well-known Civil War general.
Mhm.
Not at all. You'd sort of have to be, one of these Civil War hobbyists to maybe know who he was. You know who they are, the ones that do the reenactments, and
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
they get really into it. They go to all the Civil War museums, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you have to be one of those guys to even know who this guy was. Turns out he was reinforcing the Emancipation Proclamation before Abraham Lincoln ever even issued it. So he was jumping the gun, right? He was telling everybody the good news before Abe Lincoln ever signed it, which got him into trouble, right? This got him into trouble. But the other details that he wrote in here, I was able to go online and find the correct wife's name, the wife's grave site, the different battles he was at, why they were there fighting them, and they all matched. So
Wow.
for intern me, with 3 sessions in, who was by no means an expert at this technique, that was like, okay, how could I possibly ignore this now? How do you ignore that now and just continue on with your corporate life? Right?
Yeah.
That that
Mhm.
was that was something I could no longer get out of my mind or ignore.
So
Um,
Yeah.
Scott, earlier you said that not only do people go through or may experience a past life, but also perhaps a different life in a different dimension, a different planet, etc. So obviously you can't do any research on that particular type of stuff, but how do you interpret our overall existence if people are tapping into different dimensions, different lives on different planets, different um, uh, past lives? How do you interpret that as what our existence actually means?
an infinite infinitely complex simulation of simultaneously concurrent lifetimes is the best way I've heard it.
Hmm.
Um, and I think perhaps our little monkey minds as humans aren't meant to understand the complexity of all that. We're just to experience it. The knowing about it probably comes from the other side, in my humble view.
Hmm. So when you say simulation, are you a proponent of the simulation theory that we are living in a simulation, a generated simulation? Is that what you mean?
That is generally what I mean. Yes.
Mhm. Okay.
Although I think sometimes the way it's explained is trying to minimalize the complexity of it. They'll say, "Oh, it's
Yeah.
just a simulation." But no, what do you mean it's just a simulation? That one concept in and of itself is so big.
Hmm. Right. So I see it as where people are trying to, you're right, they are minimalizing it to because that's all that they can understand, or and virtually anybody can understand. It's like the movie, it's just like that's the best way that I can explain it. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we were our existence was created and then inserted into a simulation, or does that mean that our minds created the simulation, which is what you alluded to earlier? What does that mean so that our audience can better understand?
Some of this is probably segues well into the Gnostic wisdom piece, but yes,
Oh, darn.
ultimately, bringing back Dolores Cannon, through her many sessions, she uncovered a new, I wouldn't say a new cosmology, but the cosmology. Um, and it's all of us came from source, right? All of us, everything came from source. And we're here to have an experience. We're here on a data collection mission. What's it like to be human? And not only human, what's it like to be human in 2025 as opposed to the 1800s, as opposed to the 1400s? Like, this is the simulation at play. Um, and so we're here to collect that information and ultimately deliver it back to source, because source is ultimately exploring what it is to be itself. And so I think that's the most minimalist way I can explain it. And even that feels too limiting.
So most people are going to interpret that as source being God.
Yes. Yes. And depending upon the different uh, I guess groups that are listening,
Right.
we don't I don't, speaking for myself, I don't necessarily mean the Old Testament God who was, nuking cities from orbit and flooding the world. That's not who I'm discussing. I'm talking about the original emanation, the original spark of everything, not
Hmm.
someone who is lording over groups of people. None of
Right.
that.
Right.
Um, And so it's a very Gnostic concept, because if you read a lot of these Gnostic books, and I do, this is sort of what's repeated. The universe is within you. You have a spark of the divine in you.
Hmm.
And when you go to a hypnosis session, QHHT or otherwise, you are accessing that divine spark within yourself. And this is why fantastic outcomes are possible. Um, so,
So
okay.
divine. So for those who aren't understanding, define Gnostic for them.
Um, it means
And
to know. Gnosis is the root word there, and it means
Mhm.
to know. It's an inner knowing.
Right.
The Gnostics were, I guess, in modern day terms, um, they would be a sect of, maybe a secret society, or maybe a group of mystics that, if they existed in that context today, but they don't. Um, in biblical times, they're referred to as like the Essenes, the Cathars, um, different sects of mystics that thrived at mystery schools, such as at Egypt and at Greece and in the Far East and in India. These are different centers of learning.
Hmm.
And
But
so,
there was a reason that they had to have secret schools.
yes, they had to protect that knowledge because the knowledge was not for the uninitiated.
Right.
Um, to protect them as much as themselves.
Hmm.
Knowledge in the wrong hand could be like poison. It, it's it just is what it is. You can't have too much knowledge before you're ready for it. Uh, think about the quote unquote miracles of Yeshua, also known as Jesus, um, turning water into wine. You know, acts of levitation like walking on water. You know, doing things that to the uninitiated would look at that and maybe endanger themselves by trying to replicate it haphazardly, or maybe try and weaponize knowledge again from one group of. No one would ever do this, right? No one would ever take knowledge and abuse it and use it for the wrong reasons, would they? Right? Humans wouldn't do that.
No.
So what I'd like to do is put together or try to connect that what was happening back in ancient times with the Gnostic sects and put that together with as what you opened up with, where you have these families or these different
Hmm.
organizations, that keep all this information to themselves. Now, it's my understanding that the Gnostics, one of the other reasons that they stayed secret is because they were sharing this information. And you had these other organizations like your primary big religious organizations who are like, no, we don't want everyone to know this information, because a lot of Gnostic believers were killed, drowned, burned at the stake, et cetera, because they're like, no, you're giving out information that we only us chosen people, self-chosen people, should have. So I want to try and kind of connect all of that to where this is what happened in the past and this is what's happening now. And there's really that no difference in my mind.
I think it also parallels. We'll get to your question in a second, there's Dr. Scott, but I think it also parallels some of the history of hypnosis, right? Because hypnosis
Mhm.
was,
Yeah.
it was put into this category of, we don't want people to know about it, so we're going to make it bad. We're going to turn it into this horrible thing. It's devil work. And it became this thing that it was, that again, and even still today, I mean, you still have people thinking it's devil work. I mean, I'm sure you deal with some of the still, Dr. Scott, all the misconceptions around hypnosis, what it is and what it isn't. Um, and from my study and looking into hypnosis in the past and trying to figure out what happened with it and why it happened. Um, so for a time before, and dates are not fresh in memory because I don't have those numbers in my head right now, but there was a time in the history of hypnosis when of doing of getting people into trance type states and getting changes. And then something happened in the medical slash, um, you know, um, pharmaceutical world that said, "Hey, no, we don't want people doing that because we can't monetize that, right?" And
Yeah.
not the same way, anyways. And so they did this whole thing and just made it this bad thing. And hypnosis went underground for many years, right? And and from what I noticed, hypnosis went underground in a way that there were people that practiced it, but the way that it went underground was through entertainment. So hypnosis practitioners continued to practice hypnosis as stage show stuff,
Wow.
right? And
I
so
hadn't thought
that's
about it
why it
like that.
got the bad name, right? That's part of why it got the bad name too. But that's how it kept its techniques and its skills and even some of its advancements through the stage show stuff. Um, because I mean, there was a time when I mean, you couldn't practice. You couldn't say that you used hypnosis because it just wasn't. You weren't allowed to.
Very true. And we know what happens to what I think we would call New Age
Yeah,
practitioners
you don't want to be burned at the stake, right? Yeah, for sure.
during the
Mhm.
Inquisition
Yeah.
and other time
Yeah,
periods like that. Yes.
yeah.
Uh,
And then we moved up into the 40s and the 50s to where then you had the kind of the conflict between Freud and Adler.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, wait a minute, Freud's method, you know, is basically talk therapy, which continues on and on and on and on and on.
Which, by the way, he
Hmm.
himself quoted, okay, he himself quoted to say that this is not short-term work. This is going to, I can't remember the exact number, but this is going to take like a minimum of like 100 sessions before we notice change. So he himself quoted that this ain't
Yeah.
no quick process.
Where Adler's going, no, we're just going to take care of them right now. They're done. And it's like, oh no, no, we want that way,
Yeah.
it kind of, and we've talked about this many, many times, where, it goes back to nuclear power. Do you know why we use uranium for nuclear power? Because you can make weapons from it. So they had a
Absolutely.
choice. They had uranium and they had thorium. And like, well, thorium will work better. It's sustainable. You can't have meltdowns. I mean, it just works better. There's very, very little waste. But this is monetizable. This become uranium, we can make weapons from and such. And so there's so many of these different things, and you're a perfect example of this. All these different things where it's like you have a choice. There's always a choice, and it's whether it's the powers that be who are saying, yeah, well, we're going to take away that choice. We're going to give you one option because that's the option that works the best for us and our agenda, which is what you were just talking about in the very beginning as well, is that you have these families that, perpetuate this type of thinking. It's like you maintain it. It always has to be monetizable. It always has to be, go on to for on and on and on and on. And it's we have to start looking at society, and thank God there's people like yourself who are saying, no, it doesn't have to be this way.
Absolutely. It does not have to be this way. We're co-creating both the heaven and the hell here
Hmm.
simultaneously. Recent time periods suggest we gravitate more on the hell side. History says we've been intent on creating hell. This is a very Gnostic concept. Let me just add on to what you're saying with
Please.
the idea of passive belief. We have just over 8 billion people in the world, I believe, at present. Nearly half of those fall into the three major world religions. Okay.
Hmm.
Two of the three of those religions have a belief in hell, in eternal damnation. Now, we can get into very reasonable discussions on the origins of this and how it was never a thing, right? But that's a that's probably a dissertation for another time. At
Yeah.
the end of the day, you have these three major world religions teaching the children that you are a sinner before you're ever even out of the womb. You're already going to hell. Before you've ever even taken your first breath,
Yeah.
right? You're already eternally damned. This is what we're teaching our children. Uh, and you have to have fear to create an obstacle. The number one Gnostic teaching is do not fear. That's it. That if they only had one thing to write on a wall somewhere for everyone to remember, it would be do not fear. Well, this doctrine of original sin permeates the world religions. If your children do something bad, do you throw them in the oven? No. What kind of a parent would do that?
Mhm.
Right? These things don't stand up to any reasonable, logical conclusion of a parental child relationship or a father like all knowing God to us innocent souls who don't know anything. Right?
Yeah.
So
That
you,
that by the way is unconditional, which just that word in itself, unconditionally loves you, which means you can do whatever you want and unconditionally should still love you. That's the definition of unconditional.
right, love your enemies too. Uh, this is
Exactly.
what this is what Yeshua taught. but the passive belief in hell, if and I know your audience does, into
Mhm.
meditation, visualization, manifestation, actualization, if half of the world are believing that there is a eternal hell if you mess up badly enough in life, what does that end up creating? And it's not even really an active belief. Nobody, you won't find, people walking around actively hoping non-believers go to hell. But it's enough that it's a passive belief where if you don't think like me, you're going to hell,
Mhm.
right? That this creates hell on earth, and the Gnostics were raging against this. Uh, this and the elites don't teach their kids this at all. This
Mhm.
is just for the uninitiated. The concept of hell. That'll bake people's noodles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get some comments on that.
Uh, you mentioned earlier, Ross, that when a client goes to a life that is off-world, for example,
Yeah.
it's difficult to research. I 99% of the time that is true. I did have
Mhm.
one case, however, where I was able to find research for something that went off-world. Um, had this wonderful client, this housewife. Uh, she went back probably about 2,500 years ago as an Inuit tribal young girl living on an ice floe. Um, and she was an orphan, and her parents, obviously weren't around, but she was kind of adopted by the rest of the tribe and given work to do and stuff to do to help out. Then one day, ETs appeared in her village, uh, doing mass healings, checking up on everybody. And this was accepted. It was accepted that these ETs would just come around and visit every so often,
Hmm.
right? Nobody was scared of them at all. Well, on one of the visits, the ETs agreed uh, to take some people back with them to their home, wherever that was. And the tribal leader said, if anybody wants to go, you're more than welcome. You don't have to stay. You can go. It's your choice. Well, this client's past life persona picked to go with the ETs. She had nothing really going on for her. She had no real family. She didn't like, preparing the fish and skinning furs all that much. And so she agreed to go. And she ended up going to Mars. And while on Mars, she described a vast civilization that had underwent some type of ecological disaster. And um, they were trying to nurse life, bring plant life back to Mars. And so she was taken to Mars and she was taught telepathy. And the reason why she was taught telepathy was so that she could lay her hands on the roots of plants and communicate to them and coax life from the soil. Well, in her present life, she always wondered why she talks to plants, right? Isn't that interesting? She
Hmm.
learned how to talk to them in this past existence. Well, while there, of course, I'm making notes in the margin, like I always do. While there, she's talking about a lot of symbology, like there's temples, and there's bull statues, and there's different markings on the temples, um, and different things that the ETs were wearing, different types of clothing. And so I'm just making notes of these things. Come to find out, because I thought I'm not going to be able to research this. This is obviously off world. Come to find out, CIA's Project Stargate, which is now declassified. You can go to CIA.gov and download the Project Stargate PDF, which, trust the CIA, at your own risk, I guess. Nonetheless, you can find this PDF there. And it describes much of the same thing, much
Hmm.
of the ecological disaster. Even the time frames matched up. Um, the beings in the CIA project were sort of in stasis. They were waiting for the right time to come out and bring life back. And I was able to match that with the different star charts, which I'm writing, which I put a chapter about this in my book that is coming out probably in a couple months. We're in the
Good
final
for you.
stages of this now.
Good. We always want another excuse to have another interview with somebody. So when that's ready, you're going to call us. So isn't this also similar to like the book of Ezekiel?
That's a great book, Book of Ezekiel.
Exactly. Which is, again, it's where there was a visitation and somebody was actually taken to, I don't know if he was taken to another planet, but he was actually taken to another solar system, if I recall.
Ezekiel, yes. E- and what's interesting about Ezekiel and books like Enoch, you sort of
And
have
Enoch, yes.
the same thing. But what always sort of prickled the back of my brain when I was reading Ezekiel was how the archangel Gabriel appeared and he's talking to Ezekiel, who's
Hmm.
kneeling in down on the dirt to this superior being, and Ezekiel tells him to get up, because not all these demigods like to be worshipped. But then Ezekiel went on this complaining monologue where he complained about how he never gets any help. Archangel Michael's always too busy. And I just remember thinking, what? You're supposed to be all powerful beings. First of all, why do you need help? Uh, and second of all, why are you complaining about it? It just always rubbed me kind of strange when I was indoctrinated into that belief system.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
it is very interesting how that works. Yeah, I was not the best student when I was younger because obviously I went through communion and such like that, but I was not the best student because there was all kinds of questions that I always had that I was basically told just accept what I say. I'm like,
Right?
well, that just doesn't work for me, dude. You know?
That doesn't work. It probably doesn't work for much of your audience either.
Yeah, exactly.
What
Exactly.
what you find out is, Yeshua or Jesus, and we can get into why he's called Yeshua, but he didn't serve Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. He took every chance he could to say, no, your father is not my father. If you knew my father, you would love me. Like he said that multiple times and made that plain. However, this is minimalized by the church. They
Hmm.
they they write whole concordances on what that could possibly mean rather than what it actually says. You know, the Old Testament God is not Yeshua's father, right? Now, what does that imply about everyone who worships the Old Testament God? Well, then they're not worshiping source. They're not aligned with source. They're probably have a sort of Stockholm syndrome because the Old Testament was so violent.
Hmm.
Now, violence has to be accepted into the belief system, and so violence on behalf of God is fine, right? This is what happens. And so I think with the Gnostic wisdom now sort of, I don't want to say becoming popularized because I'm not sure I'd call it popular yet, but it is growing in
For sure.
recognition,
Hmm.
is
Yes.
that we need to sort of divorce the Old Testament from the New and recognize these two things are not the same. They are not.
And we're seeing a lot of changes in society as where a lot of surveys and things that are being done they're saying well people are just getting away from the organized religion and are losing faith in that there is a God, et cetera, which is I personally don't believe that's really the truth. I think they're just simply saying you guys have been living like this for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, whatever the case may be, is really not working for us.
Well said. It
Millions
isn't.
and millions and millions, maybe billions of people in that time frame have died in the name of your specific religion.
Yes,
How does, and how can that possibly be if this is, as you were saying, this all great, I love everyone. It's like, well, then there's this hypocrisy that just seems to be kind of keep coming up. And I think one of the greatest inventions in the world is the internet because it's allowed a lot of this information to come forth, and people kind of going, "What? You got to be kidding me!" That
totally
doesn't
agree.
make sense. I mean, that's how I That's how I learned more about the Gnostic belief systems, was when the internet came out, even though I'm kind of going, that's what I think. That's how I think. And now I'm
Mhm.
realizing that there's people way before me that believe that same thing. It's like, yes, there is something, but it's not this way.
Yeah, I mean, when Greg Braden started talking about it,
Yeah.
I would say
Hmm.
probably early 2000s for me. I was
Yep.
like, where's this dude been my whole life? It's like,
Exactly.
We have that in common. Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to Greg Braden,
yeah,
Missouri native, also,
yeah.
Um, the scripture has been edited to bury the Gnostic message,
Mm, mm,
Hmm.
uh, but it has not been perfectly edited to bury the
yeah,
Gnostic message. It's
yeah.
still in there if you have discernment and you know where to look. Even the idea of reincarnation is in the Bible, if you
Hmm.
know where to look. Yeshua talks about one of the disciples talks about if Elijah will be coming back, and uh, Yeshua implies Elijah's already come, pointing to John the Baptist, like suggesting that John the Baptist was the reincarnation of Elijah, of Moses, of Pythagoras. Though
Hmm.
those last few things I added on, that's not in the Bible, but he did suggest that John the Baptist was a reincarnated Elijah. Okay,
Hmm.
that's one great way to read that. The church won't say that. However, I would ask your readers if you look up, it's for free. You can go to, I believe it's gnosis.org, many different Gnostic
Hmm.
resources on the
Right.
internet. But if you just look up the secret gospel of John, the secret gospel of John, not the gospel of John, the secret gospel of John, you'll talk, at this time in John's life, just after the crucifixion and the resurrection and all of that, when Yeshua had beamed off to other planes of existences and he was gone, John was feeling down on his luck, and he was getting poked fun at by his fellow non-believers who were, saying, "Oh, where's your leader now? Oh, he's dead. Oh, sort of like doing a victory lap." And that really got to him. And so Yeshua appeared to John and did this entire Q&A session at 20 questions. Just let John pepper him with questions, and then he gave John answers. And talks clearly about reincarnation in the secret gospel of John. Well, can you imagine why maybe Rome, through one of their many ecumenical councils, would have left that out?
Yeah, that's the original podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely got Brogan beat. So here's, and going on, you kind of alluded to this, and I want to really kind of hit home with it, is that, these books are changed as time has progressed. The books have been changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand the importance and the significance when they find hidden or lost scrolls. And people are kind of like, yeah, well, whatever. It's an old thing. Like, no, you don't understand. It's the original. It's the unedited version. Because nowadays it is so easy because everything's electronic.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I think I'm going to change this, and and now everybody's getting a different version, especially the next generation, the generation after that, the generation after that, which are constantly being trained to go to the internet, just read it, the electronic version. I mean, you got a book coming out, so there's going to be a Kindle version that I'm sure. And then if you want to update that Kindle version, you're just going to submit the update, and they're going to load it up to that Kindle version, and nobody's going to know that there was actually an earlier version of that,
True. True
right?
story. Yes.
Okay, so then you have all this information that, is this glorious information that's on the internet, that's on these different sites, that are published in encyclopedia and Wikipedia and every other format you can think of,
Hmm.
that can instantly, especially with the advent of AI, they can instantly be changed to a whole different narrative. We want people to start thinking this, and then boom, it's done. I mean, school books are now being changed.
Oh,
They're like, yeah,
yes.
why print them? Why print them when we can just continually edit them, over the course of time? And they're like, well, it's all about cost savings. I'm like, and I agree, it probably is. It says, however, there's that other side of it. And when the advent of AI was really kind of coming to the forefront, my whole thing was like, everybody's like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. I'm like, well, who's programming the AI? And then we started to see it. We started to see it when you had these different AIs coming in, you're putting information in. It's like all of a sudden, it's like, well, this isn't even right. And now you have how many different ones that are out there, the big guys. You have all these other ones fighting for who's going to be the big guy and who's going to have the control. And it's just like, okay, so now, let's say you have five main AI programs working out there. Are they all exactly the same? Do they all have the same information? Probably not. So when we speak about the Gnostics and such, I mean, they had the actual books. Those books were, well, most of them at that particular time, I believe, were just handwritten. I don't think
Yes.
there wasn't any type of a printing press and such back then. They were all handwritten. That's why they were so valuable.
They were on scrolls,
Hmm.
in the earliest copies or collections of papyrus.
Hmm.
The Essenes, there's another book I recommend to your audience by Dolores Cannon. It was her first book called Jesus and the Essenes. And
Hmm.
in that, you get this wonderful, it's not just a hypnotic regression transcript. You get all this research about who the Essenes were and the story of their sort of existence about how they knew what the Star of Bethlehem was. Their scholars were on the hills by their compound in Qumran watching it. They knew what that meant. It portended the arrival of an avatar, of an ascended being, of that age of Pisces avatar being. They knew what it meant. And they knew that that being would eventually come to them. And in Jesus and the Essenes, we get to see Yeshua and John the Baptist through the eyes of one of their early, we would call him an elementary school teacher, viewpoint. Get to see them in their early years when they were 7, 8 years old, right? And that was so amazing to read just in of itself because you see how non-religious these people were, right? Um, we would probably call them non-religious. They probably wouldn't agree with me because they agreed that with source, but certainly not a conventional religion, certainly not for the time, although they
Yeah.
did respect the Torah, but they were very enlightened for their time. And their compound had a wonderful library, according to this client under hypnosis. And they had a working model of the solar system in their library. Talk about moving the timeline back, right? This
Hmm.
would have been
Yeah.
before Copernicus, right?
Right.
Galileo, all of them. Uh, and they've guarded this knowledge up until the point where they knew that their end was coming. It was foretold in the stars, and they really respected astrology. And so they did the best they could. They ferried some of their writings to nearby caves. And then, you know, then it was sacked. Titus, I believe it was Titus, um, by orders of Rome, just executed the Essenes, who did not give up the location of this knowledge that was priceless at the time, and
Hmm.
it would not be discovered until the 1940s. And so now we can look, and so to your point, Ross, I'm bringing this up because looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi text, looking at these things, looking at the Essene writings, it makes all of the edits very apparent. You you
Right.
can you
Right.
can see what they changed and
Hmm.
the effect that it's had. And so that's why with the invention of the internet, or I should say discovery of the internet, uh, this knowledge becomes even more powerful because now the knowledge is finally starting to spread globally very slowly. And now you can go to your used bookstore or go to your computer and get the knowledge for free, what they had to die to protect
Right.
back in ancient
Hmm.
times. It's just getting
Right.
people to pay attention to it.
Exactly. All right. So that was one of the fastest hours we've ever done. So Dr. Scott, tell everybody how they can find you. I know you said you had a special offer for everyone listening. Where can everybody find out about you? Because this is fascinating. And when your book comes out, we're having you back on. I'm not
I
even,
love to do it.
I'm not even asking you, I'm telling you.
I look forward to it. Yes. So there's a number of places people can find me. My primary website is matrix-hypnosis.com. And on that website, you can see my socials up there in the navigation bar. I would also ask that people go to mysticmatrixdesigns.com.
Hmm.
Mysticmatrixdesigns.com. A friend of mine and I are working on an esoteric line of clothing to sort of integrate a lot of the ancient symbology in a meaningful way back into our everyday wear. And so if you go to mysticmatrixdesigns.com, you'll see this, our first product, a gray hoodie that has the flower of life over the heart. And on the back, it has the Egyptian Ankh and the Eye of Horus. And you'll see an explanation there as to why we chose those symbols and why we placed them where we did on the clothing.
Hmm.
And so this is what we want to do. We want to pour research and understanding back into symbology and incorporate it into our everyday wear. So for your audience, if they go there to that website and they at checkout they can enter the promo code ROSS ROSS, they'll get 10% off.
Very nice. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And we've been to that website. There's some pretty cool stuff there too. And they've actually sold out of some of their sizes too. And that's how popular this is. It's people are really, really understanding it, and it's just really attracting people. We're looking forward to more new designs that are coming up too. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Gary, anything else?
Oh man, not to we'd start another rabbit hole. I got it in my head. I've been holding back, so we'll have other
Yeah.
conversations for sure.
He's
Because
like biting his
Never
tongue.
enough time.
I yeah,
All right, that's the
the
next
whole
one.
Gnostic thing and Gnosis. I've got some
Yeah.
interesting theories, anyways.
So
But
Scott, your book's coming out? What's gonna entail? What's the overall theme of your new book?
So the book is going to be called Quantum Intern Year One, and
Okay.
it talks about this journey of learning this technique, from someone who didn't know anything about it.
Okay.
Right? There's several authors skilled in QHHT that have these amazing books out, and I highly recommend them. But what I realized was missing was, what about the guys that didn't know what they were doing? Did they still
Right.
have good sessions? Right?
Right.
And so you get that intern's perspective, where
Oh,
I'm
cool.
self-critical looking back at, wow, I messed that one up. Nope, I shouldn't have did that. Right? So it kind of gives the everyman's approach to someone who was not raised in New Age spirituality, wasn't even really exposed to it until the mid 20 teens, and who really just decided to, take it on faith to
Mhm.
jump into it and do the best he could.
cool.
That is awesome. That's so I'm honestly thinking that the next interview we do, we're just gonna do an extended interview because there's just so much here. And which we've done those in the past when we had I don't remember his name, but the expert on Nikola Tesla. I think
Yeah, yeah,
I think
that
we
was
went
good.
2 hours. It was just we just couldn't stop. It was so fascinating. I think this is gonna be the same thing that we'll do on the next one.
Sounds
But
great.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. I see a bright future for you and your practice, and possibly doing a lot of stuff with us as well. And that's all I got. Everyone,
Mhm.
thank you so very much for joining us, and we will see you on the next Infinite Wisdom Experience.
Thank you for having
Be
me.
well,
Bye-bye.
everyone.